I'm just discussing a topic because in recent years, I think in the past 20 or 30 years, various different forums came out to be mefakfik about Esrogim in our times that don't have a pitam, whether they're kosher or not. And ba'ofen kloli, sometimes I have difficulty defining myself. I usually don't have difficulty in defining others, but defining myself sometimes is to me a bit complicated. But I am, I think, very aduk in minhag aviseinu shebiyadenu, and to adhere to minhag avis and the tradition, the Mesodas halacha dor achar dor. So the Rama writes in Sif Zayin and Simen Tov Reish Mem Ches. This Sif deals with Pitam, Nital Pitam, Nital Dadoi, Hu Harosh HaKotne Sheshanta Boi Posul. Yesh Machmirim Im Nital HaSheshanta, even though the stick is intact and it is only the perach on top, which is Nital, the Hainu Mashakodim Pitmo. But everybody agrees that im nital hadad, sometimes Esrogim that have a pitam, on the top of the esrog there's like a little twig, a little branch, or a little stick, looks like a little piece of wood, and on the top of that there's the sheshanta. Nital hadad, posel. Nital sheshanta, machlokes hashoynim, v'toiv lahachmir b'mukim she'efshar. לעניין דינה אין לפסל אלום כנית לדעת היינו עץ שלא ישפית מעולו ולא ישליט לששנתה. And now the Rama writes, כל זה דווקא שנית לו, אבל הם לא יהויה בו ידעת מיועלם כושר, וכן רוב הסלוגים שמביאים במדינת אלו don't have a pitam. And therefore an esrog without a pitam is kosher. The problem is only an esrog shenit al ha-pitam. So, what about Esrogim in our days, in which there are many more Esrogim with pitams than there were in the past? And I remember even when I was young, going back 30 or 40 or 50 years, there weren't nearly as many Esrogim with a pitam as there are today. So some Gedolim in recent years wrote that because there are many more Esrogim with a pitam today, it's no longer shaykh to say I know the Vusayu. And maybe when the Rama writes, V'chein Rav Esrogim Shevivim Medina Seilo, that is the reasoning why it's kosher, because Rav Esrogim. I still think that Rav Esrogim don't have a pitam, but I don't think it all depends what is the Rav and what is the Miyat. So the Kapis Tmorim, which is very interesting, in Lamed Daled Omed Beis, the Kapis Tmorim writes, there are two different types of Esrogim. Esrogim with a pitam, Esrogim without a pitam. If an esrog doesn't have a pitam, it's kosher because it is the species, the type of esrog that doesn't have a pitam. And an esrog doesn't need to have a pitam. But if an esrog had a pitam and it fell off, then it's posel. And therefore he writes that an esrog without a pitam is kosher only if all the fruit on this tree is without a pitam. But if on the same tree, but some is Esrogim with and some is Esrogim without, the ones that are without are posel. So it's hard to say, but obviously the Kapis Tmorim wasn't familiar with Esrogim and with Esrogim trees, because there's no such a thing that there's a tree that has Esrogim without and another one that has with. And as we know today, every esrog has a pitam when it starts to develop and starts to blossom. Most esrogim at a very early stage, the pitam falls off, but they all start with a pitam. Some of them stay with a pitam, that's a minority. Today, more than ever before, because today we just have more advanced agricultural procedures, and there is a spray that's machazik the pitam and prevents the pitam from falling off, and that is the reason we have more esrogim with a pitam today than we ever had before. the makor of this halacha, that an esrog without a pitam is kosher is the Rosh, and the reasoning of the Rosh is Hainu Revisayu. Zeh derech giduloi. So I just want to quote a few Megidoli Hazman that are mefakbik regarding Esrogim with a pitam. Rav Yoshev in a shiurim on Masechet Sukkah, Lamed Vav Omed Aleph, and even though the shiurim aren't Piskei Halacha, but Rav Yoshev was one of the greatest and most important poskim of our time. And when he related to halacha in his Blatshir in Gemara, definitely has huge significance. So it is quoted in his name in Sukkah Daf Lamed Vav Omed Aleph. It depends. If the pitam fell off before the esrog had a shear esrog, then it's kosher. But if the pitam fell off after the esrog was already an esrog kosher and had a shear esrog, then it's pasul. That's a gavaldig chiddush, and we would never know because those that are megadol esrogim don't keep check, and they don't measure esrogim before they're fully developed. Do they have a shear beitzah? Do they have a shear egois? And it's a gavaldig chiddush that has no source. Rav Moshe Sternbuch was probably the first to come up with this chumrah, and that is way before we had Chuvas Vanhogas. Moedim Ismanim, which Rav Moshe Sternbuch wrote when he was relatively young in Chelek Vav Siman Samar Beis. And his argument is because in our times Rav Esrogim have a pitam at some stage, and then the pitam falls off, we can't say Hainu Rivu Sayu. And number 3 is a Meir Brandsdorfer, with whom I had a relatively close relationship in Shal Shuvas Knei Boisim Chelek Beis, Chof Ches Chof Tes, and he is Medayek Maloshen Aramo and Loshen Arash, only an esrog that never had a pitam is kusha, but an esrog that had a pitam at any stage and the pitam fell off is possible. However, as we know today, every esrog has a pitam b'tchilas giduloi, and the pitam just falls off at some stage. Most esrogim are at a early stage, some at a later stage. But it all depends on shas lekitosoi. And an esrog shebeshas lekita doesn't have a pitam, it's an esrog kosher, and it is only if the pitam fell off or broke off, la'achar nilchat achar shenilchas shemino ilan, only then is there an esrog possible.
Is there a dig from the fact that he says it doesn't quote his Yatzim and Gidra, he doesn't quote the Rosh at all, he only quotes Lashon Orchos Chaim.
Yeah, so the Orchos Chaim is somewhat problematic, but we will start off with the Ramban and the Ritvo and other Rishonim
He
that
says he
already.
doesn't quote any of them, he only quotes the Orchos Chaim.
Yeah.
Does it have to break off directly also, or if a person, like, the mice broke it and then picked it, would be fine?
If it's a Dayan Mechuber Ilan,
Yeah.
that might be possible. I think it is only if it falls off Derech Gedelosei, only then could we say Hainu Revisayu. That's darker. So Rav Wosner also deals with this question in the first chelik of Shevet Alevi Simen Kuf Ayin Zayin. And Rav Wosner writes, even though L'cha'oire from the sources of Mishya Yosef and the Rama would be mashmer that an esrog that had a pitam and it fell off would be possible, he goes to great length to be miyashev minig oilam, and the minig is that we use esrogim, even though in all likelihood we know today that they had a pitam and they fell off. So Rav Wosner brings a dimyan rochoik from Tshuvas Chasam Sofer Yerdei Yosef and Reish Nun Vav. The Chasam Sofer Bechlal is in Hilchas Tam, and he deals with the Sefer Torah, which is an old Sefer Torah, and the letter is the ink developed a reddish color. They're no longer black, but they have some reddish tinge, and the Chasam Sofer passes the Sefer Torah, and he writes, even though it's a machlokes of Shema v'chachomim v'meichavei Shas, kol oimid lisaf kasorov doma, kol oimid little kirin notel doma, that is only when it is not the nature of things. So oimid lisaf, but it's not a natural process. But when it is the nature of things, everybody agrees. Kol oimid kenotel. And therefore, if ink without any intervention, turns from black to red, it is as if l'chatchila it wasn't black, and yoy needs to be black. And if black turned to red, then it's like we learn in Hilchos Nida, Haishacha Odamu, El Shaloko, and we say Kol Ha'oimed, and therefore it is posel l'chatchila. So the Vazu wants to be mechanish. If a pitum falls off, and we say Kol Ha'oimed Listif Kasor Doma, Kol Ha'oimed Lipol Kenofel Doma, and it is as if this Esrog never had a pitum, and therefore it would be kosher. Echsem Sofer is a chiddush l'kisha atzmoi, and I don't think we could be medame milsa la milsa, and I also don't think we could know that it's oimid lipoil. The fact is, on that same tree, some Esrogim stayed with a pitum, so this seems to be coincidence.
All the ones that fell off are obviously illegal.
Would we say that because coincidentally this Esrog had a pitum that fell off, it was nigzer merash? So I don't think this depends on our basic approach about hashkocha protis and hashkocha klotis. Does a Kodesh Baruch Hu decree and every Esrog whose pitum falls off that this pitum was meant to fall off or not? For this sugya, we need to learn Minchas Shel Amunah V'Betochen. There's a big ma'amer about this, but I don't think it's hard to say. Oimid, it's not oimid lakach. Many Esrogim on the same tree stayed with a pitum, without a pitum. My ikar argument is minig oilam in pashtus divrei harishayim. The heter is hainu rivusayu. That is the derech Esrogim. So the Ramon Sif Beis speaks about what we call today bletlach. And the Ramon writes, Nagol hachsher an akovim shenasem be'ilin al yedei koitzim, af al pi sheyesh v'em chesoroim. And l'chayr it would be a psil of chosor. Shazeh derech gidiloson. Anything that is derech gidiloson shel Esrog cannot be possible. The Radbaz, choose Radbaz Chelik Dalet Siman Elef Kuf Pei Beis, writes a gewaltige chiddush. Chazozes doesn't pass an Esrog, and he writes Ba'artzeinu be'eretz Mitzrayim Makas Medinahi וכמו שניתלה פתמוסוי פוסול אפילו אנו מכשירן אויסוי שאין לו פיתה לפי שאנו אומרים זה דרך בריאוסוי כך גם בחזוזס זה בריאוסוי ודרכוי וטיבוי. This is a gewaltige chiddush in the Radbaz, because chazozes passes an Esrog, but the Radbaz writes in a land like ours in which almost every Esrog has a chazozes. That's the way they come. Hainu Revusayu, ze derech briyosoi, ze derech gedelosoi, and it's not posel, and he learns this from the din of Pitam. Nitel a Pitam posel, but if that's the way it grows, then it's kosher. The din of Bletlach is the most compelling source because it's chosor. And Afar Piken the Ramah writes, but this is derech gidilosoi. All the psulim of Esrog is when the Esrog is different. But an Esrog which is like all the others is a derech gidilosoi, even though it has a chosar, and chosar is posar b'yom rishon l'kuli alma, but this would not be defined as chosar because that's derech gidilosoi. The Radbaz explains that is the din of Pitam, derech gidilosoi, derech briosoi, and he learns chazozes. The chiddush of the Radbaz, which I'm not sure is in his Kabbalah halacha, because chazozes is posar lahedya. Chosar is also posar lahedya. So that's the Radbaz. So would we differentiate and we say because in Eretz Mitzrayim most Esrogim have a chazozes, then that would be different? That's a chiddush. That the same Esrog in Eretz Yisrael would be posel and in Mitzrayim would be kosher. But the point that I want to make is Hainu Revistai V'zeh Derech Gidolosoi.
Is there a difference if it came to the Shir yet?
What?
Is there a difference if it reached the Shirs?
I don't think so. That's the chiddush of Rav Elyoshe, which I'm not aware that anybody else has. I think Derech Gidolosoi is most Esrogim, the pitum falls off before they are fully grown and fully developed. The only chumrah I might be willing to accept if it's fully developed, and it doesn't depend in sheer Esrog or no, but a fully grown Esrog, which is already oimed lelekita, maybe then it is no longer hainer v'sayu. If one breaks it off, definitely that would not be derech briosai. And if it falls off after shenilkat, we would no longer say derech briosai. So I think an essence without a pitam would be possible be'echod mishnei porim. If the pitam fell off la'achar shenilkat min weights, or if the pitam was broken off even b'mechubar. But if at any stage the pitam fell off b'derech tivoi, kedarkoi, kederech briosoi, the esrog is an esrog kosher.
The last
Even
time
after it's fully developed. After it's fully
I
developed.
couldn't find the same. The Lush Mabit they bring as the rise that for Eliashiv's.
Okay, so I'm reading a Mabit Chelek Gimel Simon Memtes. גם יש הכשר גם כן באסרוגים הרבה, וניקורים שמתחילס גדילוסם אין להם פיתם, לא ישהוי להם ונופל או נשבר, אלא שמתקטנוסם לא יגודל בהם פיתמס. שהם ניקורים כי יש במוקם הפיתמס כמו גומו, מתחילס בריאוסם, והם קשרים לכולי עלמא כיוון שלא יהוי להם מקודם.
That's in the Lashon HaRamah. The Ramah says Shalahoya Boy Ma'olam.
Mabit says Hedi Katnusa.
The Ramah saying that it was never there.
Yes, I wasn't aware of the Mabit, and I don't know who this Sefer is, but on the other hand, he brings some of the sources that I also brought. So let's have a look at the Rishonim, which prove the kashas of these Esrogim. So the Ramban, Hilchas Lulav Laharavid, Loi Olo al das ma'olam shi'aposel esrig b'shvil haneitz. לפי שהוא נוישור מעצמוי ואינוי מגופוי של אסרג. ואין הפרח נמצאו באסרוגים אלו בקוטנון, אבל בשעס גמר פרי וכל שכם בתולש, אינוי בהם. So the Ramban was aware that the esrog has a nates, it has a pitam betchilas giyosoi, but noisha מעצמוי. ואם נוישה מעצמוי, אינו מגופוי של אסרג, it doesn't pass לו. ריטבו, למד היום את בייס, לכשום פסול כשנית לא יסי הנץ ואין אלוהי מעלה ולמורת ורובין של הסרוגים נויש למהם אויסן הפרוחה מיד. So the Ritva also was aware that an esrog has a pitam, but it falls off. שבו להלקת סמשין סמך. אוי דני אוימד, דווקא בסרוגים שאין דאקום בכך לסיעה בשביל ליפל הפרח שלהם בקויתמון פסולים. אם ניט להפיתמו, אבל בסרוגים שדאקום בכך שאין לדברי הכל, ואין זה בכלל ניטל הפיתם. I see some other Rishonim. רבינו מנויח, דווקא שואל לו אסרס פיתמה ונופלו, דהבה לחוסר ופוסל, אבל הם לא יסלו פיתמה כדרך אסרוי גמר בכושר, והיינו דמרינן נתלה פיתמוסוי, and he also quotes the Ravid that I mentioned before. So the Shulchan Aruch and the Mishnah Berurah, which I would like to see, Tofresh Mem Chesif Kotten Lamed Beis. That's actually where we are learning in Sif Zayin. When the Ramah writes, Im lo hoye medad miolam kosher, kiven shekachi b'riyosem v'zeh derech gidulon, ein lech anoisem b'shem chaserem, oy she'einen hodo. So obviously in many Sforim, their understanding was there are actually two different types of Esrogim. Some Esrogim that never had a Pitam and others that do. Today, all the people that are Megadol Esrogim, and I personally spoke with some of them, say there's no such a thing in Esrog that never had a Pitam. The Pitam is an essential part, like almost every Pri that starts with a Perach, and then the Pri develops, and the Perach at some stage withers away, and it falls off, and that is what happens with an Esrog. And actually the Pitam is the Perach, which is Tchilas Geduloi Shel HaEsrog. So how do we deal with the situation in which there seems to be confusion between Rishonim and Poiskei Adoros regarding the nature of things, in which the Ramban and the Ritva and the Shabbat Aleket and some others clearly understood that the Derech Esrogim is that the Pitam withers away and falls off at some stage of development, and some other Rishonim seem to understand that there are Esrogim that never had a Pitam, and that's why they have a Guma where the Pitam was supposed to be. And I think the crucial factor is Derech Gidulon, and that is the Ikar Yesoid, Derech Briusam, the Derech Gidulon, and everything that is Derech Giduloi is kosher.
Maybe the Chazonish say b'shmoi that if the Pitam was very, very dry, and even after Tli Shosoi it falls off as just kind of he was machshir that also.
Where is that brought? So I'm happy that someone. So I'm happy that someone is makel more than I am, so I feel more comfortable standing where I stand. So I'm a big machmir, and I think that is a kuri yesera, to say that if the Pitam fell off after its nitlash menoetz, it still would be kosher. So I think the derech hamelech is to be machshir and esrog without a Pitam, because never we machmer, and it's unreasonable, unlikely to assume that nishtana hateva.
So the Weiss is trying to say that it's not that it's nishtana hateva, and just the Rishonim that said that it didn't happen, they were talking about before it had a shem pri. It always had one. It fell off before it had a shem pri, whatever we call shem pri, and that's what the Ramah means.
So how do we define when is the shem pri? Is that a sheer esrog, like Rabbi Yosef said? What?
That's one.
The people who grow it say that it happens less than 12 days after, when it's very, very small. So that's when it used to happen, at least before they had this spray. So maybe Taka would be way before it has a shem pri before.
Im kenu tatud v'rechu l'shiurim. And therefore it's far more reasonable to say, depends when you look at an esrog, when you pluck the esrog off the tree. I actually got the sefer recently. ושמעתי משמוי שאפילו נופל הפיתם בתולוש, אם כשתלשו הויה כבר יובש ואוים ליבר, אין קפדה בזה. So I think that is a big chiddush, and it is brought at the Kiddush Yankov, Paskin so. Okay, this would be a kuli yasera. This would be a kuli yasera to say that a pitam which fell off after the esrog was already nitlash after pikenetz kosher, that would be a kuli yasera. But I think that Pashtus advorim, everything depends on derech gidilosoi. V'yasoid advorim, any esrog which is kibriyosoi, which is normal, is kosher. So some of the achronim that I quoted grapple. If nofel pitam is posel lo mitzad choser ela mitzad hodor, how would we understand that there's a difference? If it never had a pitam, then it is hodor. If it did have a pitam and broke off, it's not hodor. So I don't think it's such a big tema, because by the nature of things, when a pitam breaks off, the place where the pitam broke off will always become decomposed and it will rot, just like any tree which you cut off a piece. So the point of contact where that piece was cut off will always develop some, it will become decomposed. And sometimes that will spread, and sometimes it won't spread, it will be very local. But when a pitam falls off in a natural way before the fruit was taken off the tree, then there never is a reisa, and therefore it is hodor. If it breaks off, it's not hodor. But I think, and I think I made this point before, hodor, chosor, not always depend, is it nice or isn't it nice? And I think according to the Levush, and the Levush said one of the yesodis of hodor, if it's not kibriyosoi, if it's not natural. So an esrog which is in its natural, normal state is always kosher. It is never possible unless it's a balmum, unless it's different than all the others. And that's the heter of kederech briyosoi. And that is the reasoning of the Ramon Siv Beis, we are machshe bletlach, even though it's choser. But if that is the way esrogim come, and esrogim don't grow in a laboratory, they grow on trees. And if that is the way esrogim grow, then it cannot be possible. And that is the advance regarding chazozis. And that is the reasoning of an esrog without a pitam. So even though some rishonim are mashma that an esrog without a pitam is kosher only if it never had a pitam, and it's not reasonable to say nishtana teva. Did I ever give a shir in Koil about nishtana teva? Where we find this and where it's reasonable? What? B'mayim shelanu.
Yes, it's always an update.
I do not recall, did we speak about the sources we will find in the Rishonim Nishtana Teva and when it's reasonable and when it's not reasonable, which is a very sensitive issue, because we do find in some Rishonim Nishtana Teva. But it's totally unreasonable that Nishtana Teva shel esrogim. And once upon a time there was esrogim that never had a pitam, and today esrogim always start off with a pitam, which falls off. So lani is dati minhag aviseinu should be yadenu, and when you buy an esrog and it doesn't have a pitam and it doesn't seem that the pitam broke off, then it's a esrog kosher, and does not depend at which stage it lost its pitam. Kach nere ika lani is dati aloch. But I'm very happy to see this chazon ish.
Yeah, is the man to take one with it?
What?
Is the man to take one with it?
I like an esrog with a pitam. I usually have an esrog with a pitam, and even people bring me a taimani esrog. And it was, many people quoted my name that I think a taimani esrog is the best esrog, one should have a taimani esrog, which is not true at all. I'm not a taimani, so why would I have a taimani esrog? I think taimani need a taimani esrog. An Ashkenazi, why would he need a taimani esrog? I do use a taimani esrog because some people that are kind and they bring me a taimani esrog. If I have one, I'll use one. So today there are even taimani esrog with pitams, which was never known before. 30 years ago there was no such a thing as taimani esrog with a pitam, and today we have many with pitams. So I use the esrog with a pitam. It's not so much because I'm machmir and I'm choshish to the machmirim, I think it's just nicer. It's beautiful with the pitam. But it's not because I'm machmir. But I could see reasoning for those that are machmir, because there are some rishonim which clearly say if it had a pitam at any stage and it fell off its puzzle. But halacha l'maisa, I think halacha kedivra Ramban, Varitvo, and we know the Metzias today. And if we know the Metzias, it's unreasonable to say it depends whether the pitam fell off when it was small or was big. We would never know that.
If a pitam fell off because of like a big storm, so it knocked against something while it was on the tree and it fell off, would that be doing it to Ramah's letlock and still be kosher, or an external force that knocked it off, like a person breaking?
I don't know. Sometimes you ask very good questions. No, I really don't know. How would we relate to a special situation? On one hand, it fell off naturally. On one hand, it's a ruach she'ena mitzuya. So on Bava Kama, there's a difference between a ruach mitzuya and a ruach she'ena mitzuya. It's also very unlikely that we would know why a pitam fell off.
Before you take off the esrog, if the pitam's dried up and it's ready to fall off, and then we pick it, and then the esrog comes off.
That is
There's
exactly
no
what they quote in the name of the
There's no
chazon.
siman. It looks identical. The esrog, if you get an esrog that you buy, you look at it, it has the same simanim as if it fell off 3 weeks later.
Yeah, it's very
How do you
reasonable.
know if it fell off, if the moichrim cleaned it or not? If that's possible,
We
never know that
will never know, and I think in that case we would rely on the erlachkeit of a moicha, and if he knows that the pitam fell off, what?
That it's kosher. When I went to Pardes, Rov Esrogim had the
And that is exactly what they quote in the name of the Chazon Ish. If it was already dry and it was oimed lipoil, even though it fell off after the pri was nitlash, it's kosher.
His
But
taina is that
that's
if
what
it's
Chaim is
possible.
saying.
What?
His taina is that if it's possible, you have no way to know. So then what should you do? I mean, what should you do? Should you be dafka get? I know. Let's say you're not being tzedach on
Chaim
the
says,
If you're not being
Chaim
tzedach
says
on
that
it.
we're toilet that it never had it.
Yeah. Also, how can it be a psul hadar if it looks identical? Before an object looks identical, how can it be a psul hadar?
That is the point I made. It could be a psil hodar even if it looks identical. Psil hodar would not always depend on how appealing it is to the eye. If it's mishuna, then it's not hodar. I think I made that point a few weeks ago when I was medayik from the levush. Hodar would either be when it's not appealing to the eye, or if it's mishuna medarkoi.
There's no mashun, it looks identical.
Not always would hodar be obvious to the eye.
The Rav says, "Nosata dvorach v'shiurim." It depends if it fell off, how big it is. Now it depends if it fell off 1 minute earlier or later. If it was dried up, it looks identical. The only difference is which second it fell off.
Yeah, whether it's kibriyosor or not kibriyosor. Whether it's kibriyosor, kedarko or not kedarko.
There's a list of the best esrog and a list of what's worse and worse. And he says bad pitam is like number 3 or 4 on the list.
I so much like to learn, and I don't need to teach. So the Bekuri Yankov. יש מעלס באסרג לעניין פיתם זו למעלה מזו. המובחרו שיהיה לו שישה נשלם על הדעת. אפילו נכסה מיקס שישה אין בכך כלום. אחרבו המובחרו אויסה שיש לו דעת שולם וניקה שלא נכסה מהדעת ולא נתלה את השישה. אחרב אויסה שניקה שלא ידעת מיילם. Why is that number 3? Why would that be less than nitla sheshanta?
Shishant, or even a piece of the pit.
But even the sheshanta yesh poislim. And nobody passes an esek without a pitam. So this is a big chiddush. Yeah, so this is a big chiddush. Achrav oisa shesh lo b'mukum pitam meplita ktana. So this is a chiddush that if it doesn't have a pitam at all, it comes after the nitla sheshanta. Nitla sheshanta, the Rama says one should be machmer. Nobody is machmer if it didn't have a pitam. Unless we're choshish that it had and it fell off. But everybody agrees that you don't need to be choshish if there is no reis. Okay, so Lanias Daiti, as the situation always was, you could buy an esrog, and if there's no reis and it doesn't have a pitam, it's an esrog kosher. Even though I did see the quote of the Radbaz and some other sources, as is mashma mapashta's divrei Rama, that it's only kosher if it never had a pitam. Tzorach loimer, never had a pitam means that we didn't see the pitam and it didn't fall off after it was nilkat. Nera Ikar, Kedivre Haramban, Varitva, Vishaboyle Aleket, and others, and it all depends whether the pitum fell off after it was plucked off the tree, or it fell off naturally, and Kederech Gedilosoy, Kederech Briyosoy, and Haino Rebusayu, Kach Nera Ikar Aliyazai.
Very often someone buying an Esrog comes to the Rav and wants the Rav to choose which is nicer, which is the better price. Very often they'll have a pitum less mutter, no pitum more mutter, cleaner, less bletlach. Which would the Rav choose? So some people are admitting they only take the pitum of Chassidish minute, but someone who really has two choices, he doesn't know which one to take.
I would take the nicer Esrog, even without a pitum. Yeah, because I'm so convinced that Ein Sorach Lachmir. This is the way it always was. People bought Esrogs without pitum, and it's not reasonable that the teva changed. So, Tzorchian, Korav Loimar, that some of the Poiskim Ledore Seim weren't aware of how Esrogim grow, and they assumed the Fi Pashtus Divrei Mixus Rishonim that there are Esrogs that never had a pitum, and those that did have a pitum and it fell off. But we see the Ramban and the Ritva. So I never like to make a list. We just saw a list of Esrogim. I can't make a list of Rishonim. Who was more important, who was less important. But it is clear that Rabbi Seinu Agedolim Aforshei Hashas they come first. And the Ramban and the Ritva are more important than the Mabit. The Mabit was 200 years younger than the Ramban, and the Ramban is Rosh Medabrim. So I think the Ramban and the Ritva Bepirushei Marashas carry more weight than. So the Orchos Chaim is somewhat of a mystery, and I don't know why the B'Yosef quotes Orchos Chaim, but once again, the B'Yosef usually quotes all Rishonim, but not always. And sometimes the B'Yosef will focus more on the Poiskim than on the Rishonim of Shas, not always. So the B'Yosef quotes the Orchos Chaim. The Orchos Chaim writes, Im lo ha'isole pitma k'shelikti oisemenu ilan kosher. On one hand, he writes, if there is no pitum kishalaktoim in awaits, kosher. That is the defining moment. But then he writes, so is it because we are toilet that it never had a pitum? Or maybe because there are esrogim that never had a pitum, even if it had a pitum and it fell off, it's not a reis if it doesn't have a pitum. B'shoshin ilkat menu eitz. So it's not clear how we are supposed to learn this Orchos Chaim. On one hand, he writes, "Im loy hoyel pitum kishaloktu oisem menu ilin kosher." Mekiven sheyesh esrogim shelo yolam oisem pitmus mitchilas biyosan. So that means, if it doesn't have a pitum b'shas lekita, we are toilet and never had a pitum, and that's why it's kosher? Or rather we would say the fact that an esrog doesn't have a pitum is not an esrog, because many esrogim never had a pitum. And therefore the fact that it doesn't have a pitum is not a chasson, neither in chosor, nor in hodor. Why would it make a difference if it not have a pitum or had a pitum and it fell off? B'shas lekita doesn't have a pitum, it's kosher. So the lashon of the Orchos Chaim is not machriya. We could be mefarish Orchos Chaim b'shtei drochim, and therefore I think that Ramban and the Ritva are the more important sources, and that is minhag olam. If an esrog doesn't have a pitum, when you buy it and you don't see any obvious reyes, it's an esrog kosher. V'kach ra'ui lahoyres alocha lamaisa. V'kach minhag aviseinu b'yadeinu.
Also, the Ritva is that it falls off the yad. The Rav is learning yad.
The Loshin.
The Ritva, the Rav, it says that it fell off the yad.
Where is the Mabit? Chelik Gimel Mem Tet. Lekeshim Psila Kishnit Lo Yisenes Ve'ein Eloi Malan Loid Ve'ribin Shel Esrogim Noshim Me'em Aprochem Miyad Ve'lekala Meichesh Lo Rubim Shel Esrogim. That's right, all of them. And that was the Metzias once, that the pitum fell off at a very early stage. You know, sometimes it also depends on genetics, it depends on climate, it depends on various different species.
Today they're also spraying them with this.
Yeah, even besides the spray, sometimes, you know, trees have genetics, just like animals have genetics. And there are different strains. So maybe some trees hold the pitams longer, some for a shorter time. What is machria is, kodim shalochtoi la'achar shalochtoi, v'kach kosav orchos chaim. Kishalukto oisem menu ilan, didn't have a pitam, then it's kosher. And so, Lanias Dati, it doesn't depend whether the pitam fell off before that at the spree or sheer esrig, kolki ay gavane, zachum yaseiru, we did never know when the pitam fell off. And the place is mashma when you buy an esrig.
They say that it was before that it's sure as pre, then it has a gum. You can tell the difference. That's what they say. That's what he meant. Before that it's sure as pre, within the first 12 days, the taka has mark on your tabat, it also has a gum. You can tell the difference.
I don't know whether the guma depends at what stage it fell off. I don't know. I could check that with people I know in the industry. I don't know. I think it's just a guess. What the Rishonim right is, if it never had a pitam, then it has a guma. Obviously, even if it did have a pitam, if the pitam fell off at some stage. But everybody agrees that the guma isn't ma'akev. The guma is just a siman, did it have a pitam or not. But it's not one of the hidurim of an esrog to have a guma. A hidur of an esrog is to have a pitam, not to have a hole. That is just a siman whether it had a pitam or not.
Why was it if you haven't verified whether it has a pitam, you just have esrog in front of you?
Because ladati, it all depends. Did the pitam fall off before the esrog was taken off the
How do
tree?
we know? If I've got esrog in front of me, how do I know backwards what and it doesn't have a pitam? How do I know?
Because when the esrog is fully grown, the pitam won't fall off b'derech hateva. It'll only, sometimes the pitam falls off, and when you buy the esrog, you see that it is already rotting, the makom pitam. But if it's a healthy pitam, it wouldn't fall off, and it breaks off, then it rots, then it decomposes. And therefore, if you buy an esrog and it doesn't have a pitam at all, we would never know at which stage it fell off, but obviously it fell off lifnei gemar pri.
Weiss, and it says that it's perfectly again, and so I'm going to go over, didn't really care about it.